my slides because I feel kind of far away from my screen. It's not letting me connect now.
Do your Wi-Fi?
Ah, the same one, another Wi-Fi that I want to connect to. Oh, there it is.
Can I try something on your computer?
Yeah. Check. Oh, I can open it on my phone.
Oh, that's a good idea. This is off here right now.
No.
Let me go over. You see my hand?
No.
No?
I see. I think it's an angle.
Oh, no, I think there might be a delay. I wonder if there's a delay.
I don't see your hand. Oh, there. Now I see you.
You see me?
Oh, yeah. There's a huge delay.
Oh, yeah. When I talk, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Rob. How are you?
Good.
That's okay. This is my brother Brian.
Hi.
And my roommate Chrissy.
Hello.
I was like,
I'm sure she's coming. I'm sorry.
it's okay.
I was like, make sure I gather all the connections. So this is just HDMI.
So I did try the HDMI. We can try it first, and
Oh,
then
it should work.
but I want to see, how it works with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm having trouble pulling up like the email.
For the,
But we'll
can you
go back.
connect with your mother?
Yeah, it's connected.
Okay.
This is my Wi-Fi. Okay. So we'll try that.
Ooh. Here's an Ethernet cable.
Oh, that might be better.
Try to make the connection faster.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. It's so huge, it takes up almost all the space.
Oh, really?
Oh, what? I might put this on there.
Yeah.
Make sure it's
Better?
my brother's gonna do a live stream.
Oh, wow. Wait, is he gonna
It's just set up so it'll,
project all
it's on a YouTube thing.
Technically, I'm YouTube right now.
Oh, we are. Hello.
No one's tuning in.
We are live.
Don't say anything.
That's my big
That you may regret. Oh, is that the microphone?
Yeah.
Holy moly. Oh, it's like a little tiny robot. It does. It's huge. I know. Mike, if Mike were here, because Mike goes, and at your final defense and not the customer Instagram, you really need to replace something. And I said, Mike, I'm not doing that on your defense day. I was like, he's like,
I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have to.
he's gonna
be allowed. So
So,
what is the portion of the song and dance?
When's the serenade?
Is it working?
See?
Yeah.
Pulling out the big guns.
You gotta make sure Mike hears you.
You don't have like a little app.
Have Lady Gaga mic.
Oh. I don't think we have some days too.
No. I had this problem last night too, and it just like didn't. Can you send the link to my Gmail?
Yeah. Or if you pull up usually HealthNet WebEx, I'll log in through my credentials.
Trevor's.
Yeah, you can do that. Either way, it's HealthNet WebEx.
Is it?
Yeah, just HealthNet. The installations. WebEx.
Utilize on WebEx?
Not WebEx. Tools is but I don't remember the actual.
HealthNet UCLA WebEx.
Yeah. There's a specific URL.
You know, I think it has trouble connecting to the email website because of all the VPNs too. So but I have a problem with that last thing. My phone, yeah. This kind of slow.
You're on the Don't be devastated. Oh, really? Yeah.
Tomorrow. Talk to me about it tomorrow.
Like I said, if you want us to box a boot shit that we could go to regulation, we could do that.
That might be nice. Yeah, we'll see. Optimistically, we will have.
Your key points are Friday, we'll need both the videos at work.
That's good time.
Saturday, we're completely free, and Sunday, 5.
Saturday, I'm supposed to canter in the evening, but.
So you can or you can do something fun.
Thursday, yeah. You guys come in Wednesday night, Thursday morning.
Thursday morning, like 5:30 or
That's easy though, 'cause no, that's easy though, because then there's not a lot of traffic out there, so I can kind of get you guys easy.
So you want to see if you can actually, there is a way to use the cameras on the video.
I'm sure.
Stuff.
Yeah.
There is,
I figured out it was not working.
Yeah. Does your UCLA login still work for stuff?
Some things, not this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm only for this stuff. But the problem with doing some research on it, everyone wanted to look at that research gateway.
Yeah, and like I could have let people.
Everywhere.
I could have let people use the WebEx, but like they would have to get off at a certain time to make sure that they're muted, and I was like, this is too complicated. I know, but I was like, knowing the people who are, like, I just don't wanna, there's too many things to handle.
There's 2 people watching now.
Ooh.
See if I can figure out how to figure out who's watching. One of them might be your phone still. I don't know. I had it like basically set so it mutes and stops everybody from doing a single thing once they get on. That makes it harder to actually figure out who's actually watching, I think.
Whoever's watching, text me. Did you see it? Look at that. See how blue this is? Does it show you? Oh my gosh. How many pages is that? 360. Oh boy.
I'd recommend you have a faster, yeah. It doesn't tell me who's watching. It just tells me there's 2 people. They're both going to have not the greatest stream rates. You can probably search. I made it public because there's the like thing around. Can I forward it around?
Yeah.
Probably because you are on in the same room that you're looking at it.
I'm not on.
Oh.
I'm going to log into my magnet so that I can access it.
Mom.
Is
Me.
Mom the one who liked it too?
Huh?
Is Mom the one who liked it too?
Probably. I just sent it to you. Yeah, it might take a minute to go through if it's a connection. Lock your phone and enjoy real life.
You can hear it twice that way. If you put the headphones in, you can hear it live and then catch the delay like 30 seconds later.
Yes, now. Who else there? What's the song?
It's nice findings.
Yeah.
I was just thinking it'd be cool.
Well, I wanted a hardcover, but I found it.
How much was that? How much was that?
It's like 3,260. So I think we're done.
Who gets the books? You get one or one? Like, you get one. Yeah.
He might do it, Sean did.
You just did her.
Yeah. It's good, a little hot, but I can always, I can adjust the volume fine.
What?
Hot, I'd rather have it be hot than.
Yeah.
No, it's changed. Let's go over again. What, 35 minutes?
Maybe I had too many passwords and I can't recall which
Oh,
one. I don't want to manager. I do, but I'm afraid that having it online somewhere.
Put in a lot of trust in it. Third party system. I've had many conversations with them.
Well, you know, next time we can.
Mom says I look calm.
She can get it, she can hear it.
I know. Right? I actually thought about it. Yeah, so I think it's like, I think it's like at the last something that they have for me. You know, before she's six. Well, now you have 30 minutes.
Do we do the same thing here in the Dissertation? We put up like flyers all over the place.
Yeah. We just have like,
Your marketing campaign.
down.
Alright, so we are connected. Let's see here. How did you want to do the audio?
There's a USB there. Yeah. And then the HDMI is on that side too, right next to it. You might want to put it over there, right away.
Okay, it's fine.
Where she's meant to cut it off. I feel like vomiting. There, that's the last text. Relax and have fun. Me too, Mom. I actually don't feel like vomiting, so that's a good sign. More nervous for my first TV mess than I am for this, because that one I almost threw up into the microphone on TV. That was. Yeah,
I
you
told you
can't
you feel
tell
bad.
when it's too much. So the first time I had to there was how old were you? I was like 17.
You were not, you were never going to stay for it.
No, it's gotten a lot better over the past few years. Yeah, because you do. You're Brian. She knew.
Kind of weird now we didn't watch it.
No, I don't like it. This one. I sent you my slides last night, so just in case.
These are actually one of my safari shirts.
Oh, that's nice.
My head got left in the shirt forest. We were not of a task that was wanting to move around and we were getting back. I don't actually understand. So, these are the hands. They're only for hands. Oh, that's it. Yeah.
Who's there? Hi, good morning. How are you? I'm okay. Hi, Wendy. How are you? Hi. Well, how are you? Good. Good. Thank you. My brother Brian and my roommate Chrissy. Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, Brian. Nice to meet you. Hi. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Nice to meet you.
Corresponding for the last
Yeah,
4 years.
absolutely. My pleasure.
This is my wife over there.
Hi. I'm trying to get recognized for my big show.
Sounds good.
So you guys usually like front row meetings.
Okay. So that sounds good.
Yeah.
Use the buffer space between you.
Yeah. Squash show.
Was the discount. Or you start off.
Yeah. This is for you. That's just for. For your test. So right about. That's a good one. Yeah. And I have a lot of. Sure. Oh, perfect. It's just salted.
It took a minute, but it's there now. Okay, we're good. The microphone's on, we're good. The speaker, we're good. Reminder.
Apparently this is Nephrologist Avenue. It's not.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Oh, does he now? Okay, so we are.
Trying to give her some advice.
That's all Keats. We're gonna do that, or we do something.
Well,
Keats is tricky.
branch out.
No one really likes Keats because it's way, way harder.
That means it's more.
You're really consistent with people things. Whereas non-consistent with people things.
No, sure. I think you've got to make. That word.
I have reason my class is.
Unless we have videos.
So this is my.
And what everything you want to
Yeah, videos. No, it's all covered.
Okay, perfect. So far, I'm only sharing the PowerPoint.
That's fine.
There's on the desk. It's still work with them. You're very honest. So.
Well, it's running and, so let's try the VGA to HTML because Caitlin had issues with HTML. Do you have to change the input?
But. So you're kind of seasonal with the upload video stuff. So I had to leave that with the video guy at a lot of the meetings. Like happens, yeah. And it's carried over a lot of red and gray and Oh, people can't get to work. It's not so. Like I was like, these don't make this. So that's why I said back here, like, don't stand up or in the middle of your thing.
Oh, yeah, that's why I said, please, like, if you're gonna leave. Oh, yeah, I mean, like, just.
Usually I sit in the back to like kind of tell people
Yeah.
as they're coming in and leaving.
You can come in the sides. Come on the sides. Maybe not. There's an aisle. You can't have the aisle. There's an aisle up here, but then you know where the aisle is at all that proximity. That's seriously. It's a good way to teach you how to write your presentation. Yeah.
The last one was our sons.
Right.
Yeah. But they had incidents, they made me sit out in the hall. Oh, wow, really? No, this is just professor. But just amazing. You know, why is she still? I don't know what I said. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Oh, yay.
You can see what she might.
They have this.
They'll show up for other people. So go from like.
Yes,
They have robes and hats.
So,
There's
when it's going to
one person.
Is this something?
Yeah, it's fine.
They get your PhD.
Let's put this back in. So I'm gonna be in a this.
Little children. Andy's our son's was good natured. He was nervous and so yeah. The people asking questions, the professors.
So.
Curious.
So it'll show it.
Yeah. Teach us what you did.
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you, Raj.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was just seeing things from my boss where I was essentially to be a witness and he was a cross-examiner and he just come back and felt like the whole point of the meeting about just
It's weird. Now it's on here.
Okay, what's all this is not on the
No, okay, now we're good. No, it's fine.
Talk like Gavin.
Yeah.
Make sure I'm in time, yeah. Yeah.
So not turn it off. I'm gonna run back to my desk and send you an email.
Oh, what is Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Those are the things that I think, like, and it was, for a long time, we couldn't figure out how to, just like, how to figure out the right how to, because you use the medication for some of the lines to affect the lesion. And so it took months to do, like, actually build traces that know that these last injected this medication or these have been found like traces of already or commercial and get my work to be like this. Yeah. Yeah. So I have to remove chlorine from water units. Chlorine, basically any chlorine analysis of water. You do that, and so you end up having chlorine. Yeah.
I just like that when they correct you,
Oh, you're.
You know what? All the slides read backwards. Yep, if you want to see the slides, you gotta. You can put that.
Somebody else might, but I'm gonna be like, oh,
What time do you have to leave?
Left my house at 3:30 this morning. 5 minutes late. There was one that was very timing, but I also so that was like $15. That's the best part that's the big set.
hey, all right.
That's the bid.
Yeah, I did write that.
Right.
Works for my prayer. I had nothing.
There was some, they were to the end. Yeah, that's true. Ralph, I can't hear you.
I know, exactly. Thank you.
No, I can't hear you, Ralph.
Hey, you know what? It actually flips it for you on the actual broadcast.
Oh, nice. Okay, good.
So, yeah. I could take a look at it. Oh, she wanted to be able to hear it.
A little lighter. Oh, yeah.
You have,
Yeah, I was trying to see if you could hear me, but now I couldn't at all. Your speaker?
Nobody has not. Yeah, my thing is very odd. This, I'm not sure.
It's probably good. It's probably sad.
worst case, you can always dial phone in.
Yeah.
Alright.
That should do it. All right, let's run back up and test it. Stay right here.
We were on.
I should also test your video connection to see whether it's stable. I think Angelia was doing her because it sort of goes in and out.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems this morning, yeah, but I'm using a different connection, so I'm using HDMI, and she is VGA, right? Yeah, so, yeah, it was flipping, I remember. It's a little like. Yeah, right. Okay, that's good to know, thank you. Thanks for telling me. Ref, I heard something. Yes, I can hear you. Awesome. It's through my computer. Yes, I will do that. Okay, sounds good. Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's a classroom at the school. We're like constantly chairs around this new field. So the entire class, if you go on the chairs, you're always like constantly kind of off the edge.
That's what I was doing.
What's that? Yeah. I think this is kind of the standard room that they book for most of the companies.
The last one we were in was in, I was in that. Out in classroom.
Oh, really? Oh, Dylan's? Yeah, that's much smaller. Yeah. I think that's because this room wasn't available.
We had like a 10-person classroom.
So waiting for Mike to dial in as well.
So where is he exactly?
He's in Greece?
Yeah. Where?
I don't know where. Hopefully near a computer. I think it's a 10-hour difference. Like 8 p.m. That's why I did it in the morning. Yeah. Bedtime story. Yeah. Okay. Also don't know where Dan went, so. He was here, yeah. He got stuck down and then. Yeah.
Your first one, you could see your Sinai, which is in the classroom, used to write, it was just a school.
No, I think it's split.
Is that a trick question?
Yeah. We asked her at the end.
Too much for you, Steve.
It's about the research.
Because I think it's after the day, right?
No. Not yet.
You know, so exponential. You think it's
It's a slew rate.
Yeah, it's not different 0 to 100 ever quite usually.
Never quite.
I will talk about this.
I asked him to make it, so it's like,
Oh yeah, that's a live stream. Did you text Mike?
I did.
Okay. Did you hear back?
Not yet.
Oh.
You can put the consistency.
See how you do when you get nervous.
It's not very much interesting.
It's a long.
In this case, the next touch on the corner. I actually just bought a copy of Webster's. That's probably 2 months ago. I don't know how long it'll be. I'm going to do like 200 pages and like blow over here.
Yeah, but it's 40 pages before it gets to page 1.
I know, because that's a list of graphs.
Good old technical writing.
Ready for Mike and Dan. Dan is round. It could be, yeah. We're tying each other up. Breath texted Dan.
Yeah, that's the challenge. I thought Jim was reading the thesis now as well.
Yeah.
So here's anybody back. I know it's just a second row, but I was running down the wall.
Just seems like everyone sits in the second.
Well, that's what we did last.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. That's sort of human.
Yeah, I know. Maybe the question.
I just say it.
So I just have to schedule. Well, it's he was calling it versus physically calling it from Greece. Oh, Greece. Oh my. Oh my.
Yeah, you never know, right? And he's out there be Wi-Fi or something. Or it's not. Yeah.
So I have some stuff to call it. She does. What's up? Did you find it? So you have a copy? So what happens is does it not count? Or count still? Okay. Okay. All right. That's it. Yeah, I'll tell her when the keys.
So hi, welcome. We're gonna get started. So this is Jennifer Steers, thesis defense. Welcome everybody. I am formally her thesis advisor or her committee chair. In fact, Dr. Dick Frost is the one that is mentoring her. UCLA has some rather, I consider, draconian rules about which can chair of the committee, so I was also happy to help and be her official committee chair. So I'll go over a little bit of formal considerations of project. So basically, this is effectively the last stage in a PhD student's career here. After she presents her work, she sent us copies of the draft pieces, which you can see right there. I don't know if anybody told you, but it's not judged by weight. Maybe you were misinformed. Yeah, typically it's about 100 days. Anyway, so what I'm going to show present to us, and I don't know if you want us to ask questions in the middle or wait to the end, because either way works for us, works for me. There was 6 sense of.
We're totally.
Yeah.
Okay, unless there's anything totally, unless we're just totally flowing, so we don't have to say like good news and confused. Yeah, right. So this needs to be clarified, and then I'll be sort of a public Q&A, and then I'll ask all of you to leave, and we'll do a private Q&A, and we'll sort of leave. So with that said, I'll give you the chair return.
Okay, well, this is Jennifer Spears. Jennifer was an undergraduate at University of Michigan in nuclear engineering and radiological sciences. She worked in the radiation oncology department as a research person, research assistant for a number of years with me and with other people on a bunch of projects. She's been here since 2012 at UCLA. Got her master's a couple of years ago. But anyway, her project she's been working on essentially since she got here. Well, I should say she spent most of her time in the physics group at Cedars-Sinai. That's where her office is, so she's floating back and forth between UCLA and here. So working with the clinical physics group there, which has been great for us. Her project involves IMRT QA, and for those of you who aren't from radiation oncology, many patients are treated with IMRT. It's a very complex treatment technique, and we do quality assurance before each of those patients get treated. She's going to tell you about how that. So I don't want to steal what her talk is about. So I think we should just go ahead and you can tell us about your project.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming today. So in 2018 alone, it's estimated that approximately 1.7 million new cases of cancer will be diagnosed in the United States, with roughly 66% of these patients receiving radiation therapy as part of their treatment regimen. Radiation therapy delivers focused beams of high energy particles to induce cell death with the goal of killing tumor cells. Radiation therapy aims to treat the tumor with high doses of radiation while sparing normal tissues. In modern day radiation therapy, this is typically achieved by shaping the radiation beam with many tungsten leaves called multi-leaf collimators or MLCs. And they can move individually to create unique beam shapes or apertures in order to minimize dose to normal tissues. One way of delivering the radiation that's commonly used in clinics today is called intensity modulated radiation therapy. This delivery technique makes use of non-uniform beam fluences to better spare normal tissues without compromising dose coverage to the tumor. Non-uniform beams are delivered then from multiple static angles to achieve the desired dose in the tumor volume. In order to deliver these non-uniform beams, leaf sequencing algorithms are utilized to convert fluence maps into deliverable beam apertures, as you can see in the picture here. Wherever the pair of leaves is open in this video is where the radiation is treating the tumor volume in pink. The radiation beam stays on as the leaves move, and as you can see, these beam apertures can be small and complex in nature and are somewhat non-intuitive. Another delivery technique, volumetric modulated arc therapy, or VMAT, makes use of similar principles of IMRT, but has a rotational component. As you can see in the lower right corner, the linac gantry moves around the patient, as well as the MLCs move and the dose rate is modulated. VMAT allows for more efficient treatments than IMRT treatments, shown in the previous slide, but this also increases the complexity of the delivered plans with all the additional dynamic motions. Since IMRT and VMAT deliveries are very complex and non-intuitive in nature, we need to ensure that the plan we create in the treatment planning system is properly transferred to the treatment machine and that what we deliver to the patient is what we planned. We do this by performing what's called pre-treatment patient-specific quality assurance, or IMR-TQA, which we shall refer to it as this throughout the rest of the talk. IMR-TQA involves a physical measurement of the patient's plan before treatment. And the purpose of this is because we can't perform intuitive checks on IMRT and VMAT plans. It's really hard to look at all the plan parameters and visually say, okay, everything will sum up to the correct dose in the patient. So the purpose of this is not only to verify the delivery for the patient, but also to catch any large errors should they exist in a patient's plan. Typically, there aren't really large errors, but when they do exist, they can result in patient death in the most extreme cases, as in the St. Vincent's error. So how do we perform IMR-TQA? Well, we start with the plan from the treatment planning system, and this plan is sent to the delivery machine, or the linear accelerator. In place of the patient on the table, we put a detector, or here shown an array of detectors, and we deliver the same plan with which the patient will be treated, and subsequently compare the measurement from this device to a calculation from the treatment planning system. And this is what we call IMR-TQA. If differences do exist, we want to make sure that we catch them here. So sometimes there are differences between calculations and measurement due to machine delivery limitations, limitations in beam modeling, dose calculation algorithms, and so on and so forth. But if the calculation and the measurement match closely enough, we say the plan is approved, and we treat that patient with that particular plan. A variety of different measurement devices are used to obtain these IMR-TQA measurements. The first one in this study that we'll be looking at is the arc check, which has a cylindrical geometry shown here. The second that we'll be using is the MapCheck 2, which is a planar diode array. And the third is the Delta 4, which is a cross array. So there's two planar arrays and orthogonal planes. Once we have this measurement from any of those devices that I showed in the previous slide, we have the task of comparing this to the plan calculation. However, as you can see in this image, these comparisons are fairly complex. There's a lot of modulated dose in the beams, and so it's nearly impossible to qualitatively tell if there are large dose differences between these two comparisons, the measurement and the calculation. And so this is not a trivial task. There are various different comparison techniques that have been introduced in the field, but the most commonly used test is the gamma comparison. And it's used almost ubiquitously across the field, as its basis for use is relatively intuitive. Since a large portion of this work focuses on the error sensitivity of the gamma comparison, I want to briefly introduce this metric here. It's calculated for each measurement point, gamma RM, and this metric combines distance to agreement and percent dose difference. The user defines acceptance criteria, which creates an acceptance ellipsoid, and then the distance to agreement between the calculations and the measurements and the percent dose difference are calculated and scaled by the user-defined values. For clinical implementations, a low dose threshold is applied, and so this is typically 10% to remove any low dose points in the comparison, since there's more uncertainties in measuring low dose points, and also those points in the comparison are less likely to be clinically meaningful. We then say if a gamma value has, if a point has a gamma value less than or equal to 1, it's considered passing the comparison. So we record the percent of pixels that pass with gamma less than or equal to 1. And this means it falls within our user-defined acceptance criteria. The most commonly used criteria in the field is 3% dose, 3 millimeter distance to agreement. Most people apply 10% low dose threshold. The data is typically normalized using what they call the global normalization, so it means it's scaled by the maximum value in the calculation. There's also another option, local, which means that it's just normalized by each local calculated dose. And then you also have to choose a cutoff. So how many pixels in the comparison do you want to consider a plan passing? So most people choose 90% and say that if 90% of the comparison points have a gamma value less than or equal to 1, it passes the comparison. However, we have certain limitations and issues currently in IMR-TQA. We spend a lot of time in the clinic making these measurements and performing these comparisons, but we don't necessarily learn much from the results. The commonly used criterion that most people have implemented is insensitive to errors, sometimes very large clinically meaningful errors. And beyond that, the results are difficult to interpret and don't tie back to differences in the patient. So our percent pixels passing doesn't tell us how much the dose changed in the tumor volume in the patient. When plans fail, we don't really know why. And beyond this, when they fail, many people simply go about replanning the plan and hope it passes when they take the measurement the next time. Or some people loosen the criteria. One study by NAMS showed that up to 46% of respondents loosened criteria when they obtained a failing result. And so, we clearly, there's room for improvement, and there's a lot we can do to better understand these dose differences. So this work kind of covers a range of different issues with IMRT-QA. The first is, what is the actual sensitivity of gamma comparisons? The second is, does a particular one of those devices that I introduced, device geometry, the spatial sampling in those devices, or the delivery technique, IMRT versus FEMA, limit our sensitivity with the gamma comparison? Also, we wanted to know why and where is the gamma comparison insensitive? What features of the dose distribution might drive this insensitivity? And finally, use this information from these 3 previous aims to develop and validate a new method for IMRT-QA comparisons in the field. So the first, we looked at error sensitivity of gamma with the error curve method. The problem here is that the actual sensitivity of the gamma comparison and different gamma criteria hasn't been well studied. People typically report differences or decreases in passing rates in the presence of a very specific error. But it doesn't allow us to understand the range of errors that can go undetected in QA. So here we use what we call the error curve method to quantify the actual sensitivity of these gamma comparisons. We made use of 21 IMRT cases measured on the ARC-check device. And then we compared these measurements to plans with induced errors. So we induced artificial errors in plan calculations. 2 errors that we induced here. The first was an MU error, or a dose scaling error, simply scaling the plan MUs up or down in a positive and negative direction. And the second was a random MLC perturbational error. So we take each active leaf and every control point of the IMRT delivery and perturb it by a random value chosen from a user-defined square two-sided range. So an example of this, if I quote an error range of plus or minus 1 centimeters, what this really means is that the perturbations to each leaf can be a random number between -1 and +1 centimeters. Using the gamma comparison, we then compare the error-induced calculations to the measurements without induced errors, record the percent pixels passing for different gamma criteria, and create what we call error curves. I'm going to briefly step through the methods for the error curve workflow, since subsequent aims also make use of the error curve ranges. So we start with one of the cases that we studied, and we define an error type, so the MU, the MLC error. And then we do some range of plan calculation errors. So for this example, an MU error ranging from -15% to +15%. We then set the gamma parameters, so threshold, percent dose difference, CTA, and then using gamma compare that measurement to the error-induced calculation. And then plot the percent pixels passing versus this error magnitude to create what we call error curves. So it looks something like this. As you change the error magnitude, the gamma passing rate changes. As your error magnitude is close to 0, the passing rate is close to 100%, as you would expect. And then you obtain a curve that looks something like this for each particular gamma criterion for each particular case. We fit a sum of Gaussians to this curve, and this allows us to calculate the range or the width of these error curves. And the width of the error curve is what we call the lab, the errors that could pass QA for this criterion. So in this example, MU errors of 1.6% could pass IMRT QA, given the 2% 3 millimeters threshold fit criterion shown here. What's important to note is that a larger error range means lower error sensitivity. So we calculated these error curve ranges, or the error sensitivity, for 36 different combinations of gamma criteria. We changed low-dose thresholds, which has actually not been studied well in the field, so people haven't really looked at how this low-dose threshold affects sensitivity. We also changed DTA and percent dose difference criteria, resulting in over 20,000 gamma comparisons for just this portion of the work. And I'll just show a few representative graphs. Here we're looking at the MU error range, or the range of MU errors that can pass IMER TQA for the gamma criterion on the x-axis. Each one of these lines is an error range for one particular case. So this is the range of error curve ranges for each gamma criterion. The first thing I'd like to point out is that for the most commonly used gamma criterion, 3% 3 millimeters, you can see that there are some fairly large MU errors that could go undetected for this criterion, up to about 9% for a few of the cases. And then also the other interesting point to note is that as we increase the low dose threshold, so from 10% to 20% to 50% in the blue, green, and pink respectively, you can see that the error sensitivity actually increases with higher low dose thresholds. We see the same type of behavior for the MLC error. And again, as before with the 3%, 3 millimeter criterion, we can see that some large MLC errors, the random perturbation errors, can go undetected with this criterion. So this part of the work, we showed that large errors can go undetected with common criteria, but also that higher low dose thresholds for these ARC check cases improves error sensitivity. And this method is easily extended to other devices, other errors, even other analysis techniques, allowing people to really quantify the range of errors that might be going undetected in their clinical processes, or also help them to select more appropriate criteria for use. The second part of this work looks at different effects from detector geometry, the spatial sampling of these devices, and also how error sensitivity with gamma changes with delivery technique. Our current understanding is limited for sensitivity with different devices and delivery techniques. Published literature has conflicting results, saying some devices are more sensitive and some aren't, and so it's really hard to understand what's actually going on. And part of this is because these comparisons can compound many sources of uncertainty. So real measurements have delivery limitations. Each device has different measurement limitations as well, so they perform differently in different scenarios. And so we wanted to take out these uncertainty components and look at actual error sensitivity based on device geometry, spatial sampling, and delivery technique in a controlled manner. First, we selected 20 IMRT and 20 VMAT cases, and we matched these two cohorts by complexity values, so modulation complexity score, and also the average equivalent square field size in order to obtain similar plans and IMRT VMAT cohorts, so we could compare them as well as we were able. We looked at 5 different induced errors, and we used scaling. We also did collimator rotations, a lagging leaf error, which induces a lagging leaf in the centrally located leaf in the field of different magnitudes, a bank shift error, which is really a narrowing or widening of the MLC field width, and then again, the MLC perturbational error as I described before. This resulted in over 1,600 error-induced plan calculations because we induced lots of different magnitudes of these errors for the 40 cases. And so since there were so many plan calculations, we performed batch calculations using the Barium eStampy module and developed some C# scripts to perform them in an unsupervised manner. We also looked at these 3 detector devices, as I mentioned before, ArcCheck, MapCheck, and Delta-4. And we also created our own in-house MATLAB gamma comparison code that allowed for 3D gamma comparisons for each of these 3 devices. And the purpose of this was, 1, to remove vendor-specific differences between gamma comparison implementations. Some people do some corrections in the background, and so we wanted to remove all that in these comparisons. It also allows calc versus calc comparisons to be performed, and we wrote this code so that we could perform it at both 1 millimeter versus 1 millimeter sampling between the calculations. And then we took those same calculations and downsampled the error-induced calculation to the real spatial sampling of each device. This also allows us to print out gamma value maps, not just the percent pixels passing the comparison, which you can't do in all vendor software, and this was used in a later portion of our work. We also did all this work for 5 different gamma criteria. So we wanted to cover a range of different percent dose difference and DTA values, but also different normalizations. And then we also looked at 2 criteria with higher low dose thresholds, since we saw that that appeared to offer increased error sensitivity from the previous name. So first we looked at the effects of detector geometry and gamma sensitivity. So for each one of the 3 devices, we calculated error sensitivity between 1 millimeter error-free calcs and 1 millimeter error-induced calcs. This removes effects from differences in spatial sampling for the 3 devices and uncertainties with real measurements. And this is again performed for the 5 gamma criteria listed in the 5 different error types. And I'll just briefly show results for the IMRT cases, but it's very similar results for the BMAT cases as well. So in these graphs, on the y-axis, you're looking at the median error curve range for the given error type. So this is a bank shift error, and the error bars are plus or minus 1 standard deviation. This is, the red shows those ranges, median error curve ranges for the delta 4 for 5 different gamma criteria. And then in blue, the map check, and in green, the arc check. And so if you're ever confused about which results you're looking at for which device, there's always going to be a little key in the corner showing you which device there is. So as you can see here, the error curve ranges for the arc check are much higher than they are for the other 2 devices, showing us that arc check may have very different error sensitivities.
So I guess I'm confused. So what's the error range?
So it's the range of errors that can pass for a particular case that can pass QA. Yeah, so it's the range of errors you might miss with that given gamma criterion. And that's the median error curve range across the 20 IMRT cases.
That's why. So 0.2 will be plus or minus 0.1, or is it signed or unsigned?
Yeah, that's plus or minus 0.2, so it's in both directions. Yeah.
Plus or minus.
So then for the other error types, since we had 5 different error types, MU error range on the left and the lagging leaf error on the right, the main thing to notice here is that the arc check results appear to have much higher error curve ranges for these induced error types across most of the studied gamma criteria. However, for some of the other error types, collimator rotations and the MLC perturbational errors, map check performed less well, and arc check and delta 4 were more similar. So there's the difference is kind of swapped back and forth based on the different detector devices. Then we added in effects of spatial sampling of the gamma sensitivity. So for each device, we calculate the error sensitivity between 1 millimeter error-free calculations and 1 millimeter error-induced calculations, and also 1 millimeter error-free calculations and error-induced calculations downsampled to the real spatial sampling of the device, or at the actual detector locations in these devices. Again, performed for 5 gamma criteria, 5 different error types, and I'll just show the results for ARC check since they're representative for the other 2 devices. ARC check has the sparsest spatial sampling among the 3 devices, just as a note.
So the 1 millimeter is the shape of the detector, but not the actual detector locations.
Yeah,
and
it's
you
just
go from like a high resolution
to
the shape to the actual.
Yes.
But that's compared against a calculation that is a standard 1 millimeter calculation.
Yes. So again, the median error curve range for the bank shift error, and blue is showing the error curve range for 1 millimeter versus 1 millimeter, so the higher spatial sampling scenario compared to 1 millimeter versus the actual spatial sampling of the device. And as you can see, for this error type and for other error types, the error curve ranges are very, very similar between the 2 groups. And so this shows us that while some small differences may be appreciated, this decrease in spatial sampling really didn't play a huge effect in the error curve ranges that we saw here. And this was fairly consistent across the 3 other induced error types, the lagging leaf, collimator, and MU error type here. The higher spatial sampling here may mean that while you have more points available to help fail the comparison, you also have more points available to help pass the comparison. So you have more points that can inflate gamma passing rates in the presence of an induced error. So this may help to explain these results. And finally, we looked at the effects of delivery technique on gamma sensitivity. So for each device, we took the error curve ranges between the 1 millimeter versus 1 millimeter comparison scenario and compared them between VMAT and IMRT cohorts. While we recognize that these two delivery techniques are very different in nature, we made attempts to match the cohorts as well as we could by complexity and field size. Again, performed for 5 gamma criteria, 5 error types, and I'll just show the results for 1 gamma criterion here. So for 3%, 3 millimeters, threshold 10, global normalization. So here we see in the dark colors the error curve ranges for an MU error curve, MU error for the IMRT cases, and then for the VMAT cases. And across the different error types, VMAT plans had noticeably lower error sensitivity for the studied gamma criteria when compared to IMRT plans of similar complexity and field size. VMAT plans then may actually have some real sensitivity differences compared to IMRT plans. But again, it is important to note that these are very different delivery techniques and planned for individual patients. So it wasn't the same patient plan with a VMAT and an IMRT plan. From this part of the work, we showed that where the plan is sampled in space, or the detector geometry does affect our error sensitivity with the gamma comparison, but that spatial sampling is unlikely to be a main driving factor in our sensitivity comparisons here. We also showed that error sensitivity for VMAT and IMRT plans can be quite different. So we asked the next question, where and why is gamma insensitive? If it isn't about spatial sampling, what's driving our ability to detect errors in these comparisons, and why can such large errors go undetected in some comparisons? So there are many different theories on why current analysis techniques are insensitive, but there's no evidence-based results. Some people point to differences in normalization, so they say global normalization, masks errors, local normalization is much better for error sensitivity, but it's not used clinically. And some people say, well, we just need to tighten gamma criteria, but it doesn't really tell us what's going on underneath the surface. And so we believe that the steep dose gradients in these comparisons limit our sensitivity to errors with the gamma comparison. So to test this, we started with a series of manufactured test fields. One example is shown here. So we have a flat rectangular field shown in green with intensity spikes and dips shown in pink and blue, respectively. And this was to induce simple gradients in the field. So we created these test fields by making fake optimal fluence maps, re-importing them into the treatment planning system, and performing dose calculations. And then we induced known errors in test fields just on the ArcCheck device for this example. So from this, I'll just show this example where we induced MLC, random perturbational MLC errors in the ArcCheck delivery for this plan. Briefly, this is the ArcCheck unwrapped dose map. So it's really the dose map on the cylindrical device unwrapped into the 2D plane. So you see the entrance dose in the center of the picture, and then the exit dose from that same beam would be on the bottom of the device, but it's split in two because of that unwrapping. So we induced increasing MLC perturbational errors in this field, and the blue and the red points are both points failing the gamma comparison. The red points are simply those that fail the gamma comparison and the measurement's hotter than the calculation. Blue points are colder, or the measurement's colder than the calculation. While gamma is an unsigned value, the ArcCheck software puts in a sign based on the dose differences. And so this is a result of that here. The thing to notice here is that for this largest error type, you can see that around the areas of highest dose gradient, there aren't really as many points failing the gamma comparison. And it's easier to see with the line profile through the center of this field that, while we do fail some points in the higher gradient regions of the fields, that along the highest dose gradient points aren't failing in the presence of this induced error. So we wanted to look at how 3D gradient maps compare to gamma value maps. So we calculated the generalized gradient for patient cases using this equation. So it's just the generalized gradient. So delta Dij is the dose difference between a cut point and its 6 nearest neighbors. So it's a 3D gradient. And then normalized by the distance between grid points, which here is 1 millimeter. So this simply reduces to a sum of squared dose differences. To illustrate the relationship observed between gradient maps and gamma values, we show here a simple IMRT case, IMRT 19, measured on the ArcCheck, or simulated on the ArcCheck, I should say, and its corresponding 3D gradient map. We then induced a 10% MU error in this plan, and we show local and global normalized gamma values. And while you can see that the absolute values for gamma are higher for local normalization, what you will notice is that you can see this ring structure around the high gamma values, and that matches where the high dose gradients are. In order to ensure that this behavior is consistent across other devices, we also show that same case, IMRT19, with an induced MU error, but here on the not checked device. And you can see that same behavior where in the regions of the highest dose gradients, you have very low gamma values for both global and local normalization. And similarly, the same behavior is seen on the delta 4. This is the horizontal board on the delta 4. And this is the maps for the vertical board on the delta 4. While that's a relatively simple case, the same type of behavior is exhibited for even more complex cases. IMRT1 shown here. Even though the gradient maps are more complex, it's still easy to see that the structure in the gradient maps is almost a negative of that in the gamma value map in the presence of this 10% dose error. This behavior also exists across different error types as well. So while we showed this for a simple MU error, we have also an MLC bank shift error and an MLC perturbational error shown here. And this pans between the gamma value maps and the gradient maps just to help with visualization. Although the gamma maps look different for the different error types, you can still see that areas of high gamma values fall just outside of the regions of high dose gradients. Since these regions of high dose and low gradient appear to be most sensitive in the presence of these induced errors, we also investigated the number of comparison points that are likely to be available for error sensitivity in each device. So shown here for each of the 20 IMRT and VMAT cases that we studied are the number of the percentage of comparison points falling in high dose, low gradient regions of the field for IMRT cases on the left and VMAT cases on the right. While there's differences between the three devices that can be appreciated, what's more important here to note is that you have a large number of cases that can have very few comparison points falling in these more sensitive regions of the field. So several cases have less than 10% of their comparison points falling in high dose, low gradient regions of the field. This means that the other 90% are falling in high gradient regions or low dose, low gradient regions, meaning that they may help to mask errors in the presence of a real error. So here we showed that gamma values are low in regions of high gradient, but also that these high dose gradients are likely to be a driving factor in our sensitivity with this comparison technique. This was independent of detector geometry, normalization, and also the induced error type.
So these are again still with your.
These are PAL only.
No, this is with your test set of influences, right? These are not clinical cases. These are this test set of influences you started with.
No, these are clinical cases. Yeah, these are the 20 VMAT and IMRT that we used in the previous portion. Sorry if that was not clear. And then finally, we showed that these 40 patient cases that we use can have very few comparison points that may fall in more sensitive regions of the field. And so we believe that this necessitates the development of new methods for IMRT-QA comparisons. So the final portion of this work was to do just that, develop a new method for IMRT-QA analysis to address the current limitations that we've talked about in the previous aims. We also think that a new analysis technique that separates comparison points based on dose and gradient values will be most useful in offering more sensitive but also more clinically meaningful results. So results that tie back to differences in actual patient dose distribution. So to do this, we segmented the IMRT-QA comparisons for these 20 IMRT and 20 VMAT cases based on different dose and gradient values. So this gave us over 900 different error-induced plans to make use of in this part of the work. We then calculated dose difference histogram characteristics in these separate point groupings after we segmented them, and I'll illustrate this further. And then look at how these histogram descriptors, of which we had 11, correlate to differences in actual DVH metrics of the patient dose distribution. And then we were hoping to find a histogram characteristic that would predict a change in a DVH metric. So we studied this for the 3 detector devices and for the 40 cases that I introduced earlier. So when we have each dose distribution, we take all the points out and segment them by high dose, low gradient, high gradient, and low dose, low gradient points. Yeah. So we didn't know up front which thresholds would be most useful, so we actually use a range of different dose and gradient combinations, which I'll get to. Yep. And so we segment these points in each distribution into these 3 groupings based on variable thresholds, and create dose difference histograms for each of these point groupings. And the dose difference histograms here are created between an error-free calculation at 1 millimeter and an error-induced calculation of the real spatial sampling of the device. So we're still in a calc-only scenario, so we can tease out what the ground truth is. For each error-induced calculation, then, we end up with 6 dose difference histograms. First, we looked at local percent dose difference, so local normalization, and globally normalized percent dose differences. And again, in each of these 3 regions, high dose, low gradient, high gradient, and low dose, low gradient regions of the field. Then for each dose difference histogram, we calculate the mean, median, mode, min, and max, and also separate these dose differences out into negative and positive differences to see if that would give us some sort of discriminatory value in correlating to DVH metrics. So after we have these 11 dose difference histogram characteristics, we asked if any of these differences could correlate or predict changes in DVH metrics in the patient. We looked at 9 different DVH metrics. The main metrics we were looking at were target volume metrics, so D95, dose to 95% of the target volume, D90, 90%, the change in maximum dose in the PTV, and the change in mean dose in the PTV. We also created ring structures, which were expansions around the target volume as kind of a secondary metric to look at. So we looked at ring structures at a 0.5 centimeter and 1, 2, and 3 centimeter expansion. And calculated the change in the maximum dose to the innermost ring, so the half cm ring, and then also the change in mean dose to each of the ring structures. We pulled these, yeah.
So now we're in the patient geometry,
yes.
Not the detector geometry.
So we have dose differences from the DVH metrics in the patient geometry, right. But we're segmenting out the high dose, low gradient, high gradient, all those are in the detector geometry. So we're looking at can dose differences in the detector geometry predicting changes in the DVH. Yeah. So then we pulled DVH metrics from Eclipse using eSAPI scripting to automate it. And just as a note, these dose differences in the DVH metrics are our ground truth because we're in a calc versus calc scenario. So again, differences in the detector geometry, can they correlate to changes in the patient geometry? So we studied many dose and gradient thresholds, over 56 for each one of these scenarios. And since we don't know upfront which dose and gradient thresholds will be best for each detector device, and also the different delivery techniques. And then for each threshold combination, we calculate the Pearson correlation between each dose difference histogram descriptor in the detector geometry and the change in DVH metric in the patient geometry. And then we used heat maps to easily visualize these results. And as a note, each R-squared value on these heat maps that I'll be showing is calculated from 480 error-induced calculations. So here's an example heat map. You're not meant to be able to read everything on this graph, but this heat map is showing the correlation between different dose difference histogram descriptors on the left to the change in PTV mean for the delta 4 IMRT cases for this example. And on the x-axis are the varying dose and gradient threshold combinations. So we'll just zoom in real quick so you can get a better look at this. So for, say, this circled R-squared value, this is the correlation between high dose, low gradient mean difference in this particular detector geometry for a given dose and gradient threshold. So we used these heat maps. We had different heat maps for each DVH metric. So looking at the correlations for each of these DVH metrics. And then we end up with 9 heat maps then for each device and each delivery technique, which means we have 54 heat maps total, which is over 160,000 R-squared comparisons. We took all this information and filtered it down and selected the best dose and gradient thresholds for each device and each DVH metric. And from this, we found that the metric we were best able to predict was the change in PTV mean dose in the patient using the mean local dose difference from the high dose, low gradient points in the detector geometry. So an example of those results is shown here for the delta 4 IMRT cases, where on the y-axis is our predicted change in PTV mean, so the mean local dose difference in these high dose, low gradient regions, compared against the ground truth, or the change in PTV mean. And so for delta 4 IMRT cases on the left, VMAT cases on the right, you can see that our predicted versus true change in PTV mean is actually quite good. With higher squared values, the slopes are close to 1, so this means we can directly predict these dose differences. These are results for the MapCheck device. Again, looks like good. The ARCCheck didn't do quite as well. You have more spread of the data. And so we defined our new method. We called it the gradient dose segmented analysis, GDSA, by calculating the gradient map from the calculated dose map. We then create local percent dose difference maps between the measurement and the calculation. We segment these differences based on the thresholds that we chose. And then we calculate the mean local percent dose difference in the high dose, low gradient regions of the field. And this gives us the predicted change in PTV mean dose. So the question we have here is, does GDSA improve sensitivity compared to gamma? We saw that it directly predicts changes in PTV mean dose. So we also looked at GDSA as a binary pass-band metric using ROC analyses, and looked at the ability of this method to flag plans and gamma to flag plans with a plus or minus 3% change, and performed these analyses in R. So for ROC curves, you ideally want, for perfect diagnostic tests, you have an ROC curve on the absolute upper left corner, and you see area under the curve is 1. So for our new method, GDSA, you can see that compared to the 5 gamma criteria we used in this study, it improves sensitivity and specificity over all of those criteria for MapCheck, and also for the delta 4 device as well. For ARCCheck, while results weren't as strong as they were for MapCheck and delta 4, if I get rid of a couple of these curves, you can see that GDSA for ARCCcheck still offers improvements in sensitivity and specificity compared to 2 very commonly used clinical criteria shown in purple and red. Since all of these previous comparisons were performed in calculation-only scenarios, we also looked at real measurements from for real MapCheck cases. So we took 9 VMAT MapCheck cases, and we induced different errors in these plans, and looked at both the error-induced plan delivery and the error-free plan delivery, the plan delivery without intentional errors. We then compared GDSA, our new method, using 1 millimeter error-free calculations compared to measurements, again, with intentional errors and those without intentional errors. And since we don't have a ground truth in these real measurements, we were able to calculate change in PTV mean between the error-free calc and the error-induced calc in the treatment planning system, and compare this to the relative change in GDSA for the error-induced plan. So these are those results shown here. The main thing to notice is that, again, on the y-axis, it's our predicted change in PTV mean. On the axis, the true change in PTV mean. And that for most of these cases, the GDSA prediction was within 1% of the true change. Since our previous work also made use of a training data set in a sense of those 20 VMAT and IMRT cases in the calc-only scenario, we also wanted to make sure that we tested this with a different cohort of cases or a validation data set. So we chose 25 new VMAT and IMRT cases, and we simply selected them by those most recently treated in our clinic. And so we weren't trying to match by complexity scores or anything like that. We randomly induced errors, and so we just wrote a simple MATLAB script to pick the error type and pick a random small and large magnitude error to induce for each case, which results in 50 error-induced VMAT and 50 error-induced IMRT plans for a validation data set. We then perform GDSA and then compare these to the ground truth, which is the change in PTV mean and the treatment planning system dose volume histograms. So the validation results here for map check VMAT cases, they're very similar between VMAT and IMRT. So I'll just show VMAT here, but these are predicted versus true change in PTV mean dose. On the left in purple is the validation data set results, and on the right are the original results from the training data set. And you can see that the results match really well, and that this kind of confirms that we chose the correct dose and gradient thresholds for these different devices. Results for ArcCheck and Delta 4. And then ROC analysis for the validation cases also shows that improved sensitivity and specificity for this validation data set as well for the 3 devices. So in this part of the work, we developed the GDSA method, which offers more clinically meaningful results. It gives us results that relate back to patient dose differences in the patient using only information from the detector measurement and geometry. It was also more sensitive and specific than the 5 gamma criteria we looked at. And it's also efficient and easy to interpret. So it's not going to bog down clinical workflows. It doesn't require lengthy calculation times. And so it's feasible for clinical implementation as well. So in summary, we found that we can't really fix our gamma comparison sensitivity issues across these different devices and different error types. It's really hard to kind of find one fix-all criteria. And also the complexity of gradient maps is a driving factor in our ability to have increased error sensitivity in these plans. And the high dose gradients in these plans is an inherent feature of the plan dose distribution, so we can't really get rid of that. So to address that, we developed GDSA, or gradient dose segmented analysis, and chose proper dose and gradient thresholds for each of the 3 study detector devices. This method predicts change in PTV mean in the patient. It's more sensitive and specific in a binary setting as well. And it's also feasible for clinical implementation in terms of how it might affect workflow, things of that nature. These are my references. And then I'd, of course, like to thank my committee members for their assistance and input on all this work. Everyone from the UCLA PBM, BMP, formerly BMP department, all the student friends who are here, Grace Kim, who helped with stats consults, Raf, who's helped with a lot of logistical things over the years and this morning, the physicists at Cedars, and also my friends and family, some of whom are here today, and also attending on the live stream. So with that, thank you for your attention.
By the way, great talk. Great pieces. These are talking less of the less of So one of the things that is let me start working. Is a little frustrating because people use the term gamma comparison and define it must have a threshold. You showed the equation was a threshold. No. That's literally what gamma is. Mm-hmm. When you say gamma test, what you're really implying is the gamma test that everyone is using.
Yes.
Okay. So that said, there's a fundamental difference between the gamma comparison that you're saying, which is its sensitivity, which is known to be pretty bad, and the proposed test that you guys have, which is using the actual value, the histogram, as you call it, of the dose differences. So my question is, if one went away from a threshold, you actually said you did a threshold with your threshold approach?
For the error curve?
Yeah.
Yeah, so all the results I showed here were for a 95% pixels passing threshold. So you do have to pick a threshold, right?
Yeah, I said you'll never get 100%.
Right.
Well, you don't have to,
But
that's
everyone
really-
does, yeah.
So you do have a threshold, you just are dynamically tuning those thresholds. I'm sorry, you do use a cutoff, percent passing cutoff. But you tune the threshold, the gradient, and the gradient definition of high, steep, and low for particular types of cases.
Yes, so for the 40 study cases for each device, that's what all those heat maps were. So allowing us to select the dose and gradient thresholds that gave the best prediction for each DPH metric.
Right.
We're not changing like the discrimination threshold for passing or failing a plan.
Right.
You could say I want to pass or fail a plan with a 5% change.
So then when you went to the 50 cases, you had applied those threshold definitions to the 50 cases and said, how well do we do? Because you have a, I guess I'm confused a little bit. So go back to the graph, because
There's a lot.
difference. Well, wait, one last one. Because they're both predicted change in PD. So how do you predict the change in PD dose?
So that's where we take the mean local percent dose difference in the high dose, low gradient regions of the field.
So that isn't the percent of points you pass in your failure.
No, this is
That's
the
the mean
new
value.
method. Yeah, it's the mean local dose difference in the high dose, low gradient regions.
Right, so it's
in
a
those regions-
continuous, you're using the continuous nature of a dose difference. No, it's not a threshold.
Right.
95% fail.
No, yeah. This doesn't rely on all different thresholds.
Right. So that's one thing, is that the gamma test is a threshold test, even though gamma test was defined and designed to not be a binary quantity, right?
Right.
There already was a binary quantity, which was called a composite, if I remember right.
Yes.
It was already there, which could easily replace gamma for those tests, right? The second thing that you brought up was actually removing the gradients by doing the high dose, low gradient regions.
Right.
So I'm a little confused because it doesn't, automatically do that. Or it basically removes the steep gradient regions, and it's just that the low doses are polluting, as it were.
The low doses and the high gradient regions are polluting.
High gradient are just in they're all fail because they pass those different cases of gradient tests. So they're like in the denominator, the numerator are failing points. But the low dose, low gradient are in the failing points in the typical gamma.
Yeah, so I think it's a twofold issue.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Hi, Mike.
Yes, very nice presentation, very well organized. Really appreciate that. My question is really probably very different from Dan's. Results that you're showing here in your validation results. You picked 25 IMRT cases, which happen to be the ones you haven't done recently, right?
That's correct.
Okay. How do you know they weren't the 25 easiest in the last 100 years?
That's a great question.
Is there a way to ascertain the complexity of these cases? Is really what I'm getting.
So yeah, we did calculate complexity scores, and we made sure that they did span a range of different plan types and things like that. But so they weren't, I can tell you that they were not the 25, 50 most easiest plans in the history of radiation therapy. But yeah, they were randomly selected to be the most recently treated cases.
They're arbitrarily selected. They're not random because they were.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Arbitrary.
Okay, but all I wanted to say was, you did mention, probably was the just describe anything about what you just said, it's a complexity score, I have no idea what that would be.
Oh, yes, so we used previously published work called modulation complexity score. And we had, I have,
So we're together 190 slides.
yeah, if you want to see it. All right. So, is there a 209? Backup slides for everything.
That's okay.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's definitely in there, and they're matched by complexity score, and the equation for calculating all that is in there.
All the phone, yeah, but wait for closed session.
It's here, yeah. So the complexity score is shown in the graph on the left, and the average equivalent square field size on the right. And the MCS values closer to 1 means they're more complex. Value closer to 1 means it's a simple square flat field. So that's the difference between the higher routine and the unit cases. Does that help, Mike?
Yeah, I think so. It takes me a second to adjust this, but okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So actually, I like the idea that you're doing validation with independent 25 cases. And I was also wondering, just from your heat map, because you were choosing different parameters for defining the threshold between high and low dose as well as high and low gradient. So basically, you have the sliding scale across these two parameters. Just by looking at heat map, you could probably make some sensitivity statement, right, to say that if I define my high and dose cutoff to be 20 gray, and if I perturb that to be, which I don't know how fine sample that to be 20.01 or 20.1, whatever, then you say, okay, it seems that this pattern has shifted a lot. So if that was the case, then even if 20 gives you the best discriminated power in terms of R square or whatever your regressional power, it is still not a good choice, because that means if you just change that slightly, then everything would change radically.
I didn't do a formal analysis, but when I was looking at the differences, I mean, it didn't change much between, adjacent threshold values. And so it was very, very similar. And honestly, when I went and graphed the individual results for adjacent, because I looked on either side, and said, how much does it change? Is it a huge difference? But it really wasn't. And so it was almost impossible to tell the differences between the adjacent sampled dose-graded values.
It's good. I believe you're going to write this up later on in our script. So those are important points here, because you're looking at the dose and gradient combo, you're looking at this two-dimensional thing. So you have to say that because 2D locality, everything appears to be smooth, and that's why I'm confident to choose this particular threshold, because later on you're going to apply this two parameter across the board to this particular device, right? Regardless of what plans that you are going to do. The other question I have is that when you were talking about the characteristics of different devices, you used a lot of quantile plots. Right? That is all good, but I'm also curious about the outliers. If you could comment on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, some of the cases, there were some outliers, and a lot of those cases were those with smaller field sizes, and so larger errors could go undetected since you have a lot more low dose points in comparison that are just bumping up passing rates. So in general, that seems to be the underlying trend for those types of cases.
Okay, so it's really because of the characteristic of the plants, it's not because the device itself. So
correct.
Like I remember from one of the cases you have market that has really large variations. Right? So what would be interesting is that is there some type of interest trade-off? Like is it just a loser, or it loses on that aspect that maybe has a tighter outlier. So it's possible.
Yeah.
I'm saying that. So it's also good to be aware of.
I just have a question. You said you developed a 3D algorithm, and you applied it to your match. How does that? How do you know it's the 3D?
Oh, it just searches in the plane above and below. Yeah, it's just.
Because the calculation is 3D.
Yeah, the calculation's.
Yeah, one is 3D, but one calculation is 3D.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's a 2D array, but it looks in the 3D dose plane.
Or each detector point is individually, has an individual for each detector point, right? So it ends up being an array of gamma points.
Exactly.
I have no question.
Okay.
Did you ever see any, like in the opposite direction where like, it failed a plan and there was some error present? Did you notice any like specificity issues, or was it mostly on the process?
For gamma?
Yeah.
It kind of varies. It depends on the case. I did see one example case where it was, you know, close to failing something but didn't have a really large error, but it was hard to understand, you know, why that difference existed. Any other questions?
Yeah, so do you have any comments on the difference between the planar geometries and the arctic geometries? We might have talked about this.
Yes, indeed I do. So actually, there's some interesting slides for that. I'll talk about it first. So one of the big things about the arctic geometry is it samples the plan in a very different part of space. So you're kind of taking the plan and ripping it apart from the center, and then you're on the cylindrical surface. So when you're looking at the dose and gradient maps on the ArcCheck, especially for VMAP plans, but the gradient maps on the ArcCheck look fundamentally different for VMAP plans than they do on the planar geometries. And so, which is why the predictions for ArcCheck with this new method likely weren't as good. So if you look at, for example, so this is a gradient map for an IMRT case on the ArcCheck, and the similar on the Delta 4 horizontal board. So it's just a gradient map for the same case on the two different devices. And what you can tell from this is that you can pretty much see, you know, where the PTV or high dose volumes would be based on the gradient map. So since the new method segments points based on dose and gradient values, it works relatively well for IMRT cases. But when you're looking at VMAP plans and you see the gradient map for the same case, it's just a wash of gradient, right? And so it's really hard to pick out using dose and gradient thresholds on the ArcCheck which points you care about most and which points are going to fall in the PTV volume. Whereas on the Delta 4, you can see that the plan comes together much more coherently in the center, where it's measuring on the Delta 4, which makes sense. And so the ArcCheck device is somewhat problematic for all comparison techniques, I'd harbor to say, and that you probably need to look at new ways to analyze this type of data in order to really understand what's going on in these distributions. Because the ArcCheck is, the detectors are 10.5 centimeters away from the center, so it's pretty far. Yes?
I have a question, I just want to make a comment. As someone who isn't a clinical specialist or medical specialist, I really applaud what you do and think that if you're in a clinical application, though, being able to explain what you're researching will make it an excellent job. And I do appreciate being able to sit and listen to it, and then to be able to recognize, I think, your second slide, what the real impact of this could be. Same thing to the case. That's a good case, I just want to let you know that. But some interested in how this is from a medical standpoint, radiology standpoint, it was really nice.
Thank you.
I don't see anybody asking any more questions.
Okay, so with that, I'll finally excuse all of you.